Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, a twice annual podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, ask people who are smarter and harder working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton, and I know a lot about remembering the introductory speech this time. But I don't know a lot about the Great Lakes. That's the point of this here show. We're joined today. Oh, it is the specialist of occasions. It's Renie Miles. Renie, how are you?
I'm good, Stuart. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Renie, of course, is a strategic communicator with us at Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. And she is on because as a communicator, Renie loves to tell stories. And stories is her career. And so we're going to talk about some stories today, which is exciting.
Yeah, I'm happy to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, we're fired up. And so we're going to go right into it. But first, our guest today is in Cleveland, which means we get to break out our special Cleveland theme song. Our guest today is folklorist Judith Neulander, who is taught at Case Western Reserve University in the Cleveland area and is the author of The Folklore of Lake Erie, a new book that is full of tales from the smallest yet arguably most peculiar of the Great Lakes in North America. Judith, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Oh, yes. So let's start. Big picture. You are a folklorist. I don't know exactly what a folklorist is or does. What does a folklorist do? Do you go around and just talk to folk, or what is it exactly?
Most people think that what we do is kind of shovel around the detritus of culture, the stuff that means nothing or isn't important or isn't true. And I think nothing could be further from the truth about us. I guess I would say that embedded in the fantasy and fiction of all folklore, there is this perfectly unself-conscious and totally accurate account of the aspirations, the animosities, the aesthetics of the people who hold these traditions close. And so what we do is that we try to unpack them and to find out what's going on there.
That's amazing. So you're looking for people's tales and you're recounting them, but you're also looking for what do these folk tales tell us about the people who hold them, I suppose. And that's fascinating. How do you do that? Is it interviews? Do you go look at documents? How does one folklore?
You do everything.
Okay.
You talk to your Uber driver. You go to journals that have either articles or have collected items of folklore. But surprisingly, it turns out that the internet is like this roiling cauldron of wondrous folkloric stuff. So that was a great source for me, too.
So why did you decide to focus on Lake Erie?
Well, I live here. So that made it easy. I had immediate access. It's not like I had to travel anywhere to find things out. It's all around me all the time. And it was a way to run away from home. It was just a wonderful adventure into this marvelous stuff that we share as folklorists with each other in the professional lingo of the profession, and that no one else usually gets to share with us or that we get to share with anyone else. And I find it so exciting and so wonderful. I wanted to make it accessible. I wanted to share it. So I wrote the book.
That's fantastic. And there's a bunch of stories in there. So you talk in there about ghost ships and dogs that bring doom and sea monsters. I want to talk about sea monsters. Tell me about sea monsters in Lake Erie.
Well, all right. Lake Erie can claim a number of them over time. But I think the best known sea monster is probably South Bay Bessie.
South Bay Bessie.
Yes. Now, Bessie has her origin in two historical contexts, both in the 1800s. One of them is industrial pollution. That was a concern of the people, and rightly so. The toxic things that were going into the lake frightened people, and they imagined that they were spawning mutant life forms in there. And one of them was South Bay Bessie. So that was one context. The other context was a newspaper report in the 1800s, which I think it was the Cleveland Gazette, if I'm not mistaken. And the Cleveland Gazette criticized a local bank. I'm guessing the name was Bank of the U.S. or close to that. And the Bank of the U.S. was recalling everything that was owned to it or owed to it without any kind of consideration for what this might do to the people they were demanding this of immediately. And the newspaper criticized this, and they used a metaphor for the bank as a voracious sea monster that was devouring what was around it. So the combination of concern with the toxic nature of the lake due to industrial pollution and this use of this metaphor of the sea monster gave people a concrete way to turn that monstrous idea into a thing, and it became South Bay Bessie. You know, there was a folklorist, a golden oldie by the name of Max Mueller many, many years ago, who said that, at least it was his opinion, that myths consisted of metaphors that were later believed to be true. Well, maybe South Bay Bessie is an example. Maybe he was right.
So this causes me to wonder, so when does something that's a news item or maybe even gossip evolve into folklore? Like, how does that happen?
It's a question of duration over time. All of these ideas and thoughts and concretizations of abstracts are floating around in the culture and in the community. Some of them are going to be flashes in the pan. Some of them are going to have some kind of a life for a while, and they will eventually give way to being exposed or no longer considered important. But some of them are going to demonstrate their ability to survive over time. And that's when they become folklore, when they become traditional. You know, the word tradition, when they have been with us for a significant period of time and show no signs of going away.
So does that mean that these stories are generally like more from times gone by versus like, recent?
Absolutely not. They're happening even as we speak. Everything is vying. Everything that we think and talk about and imagine is vying for a place in tradition. Some are going to make it and some are not. And we never know beforehand which ones those are going to be.
But isn't like... So I don't know. This is a question. So part of me, it seems like if something becomes a folk tale or becomes legend, it kind of requires an incomplete record, right? And so I wonder, with the internet and digital technology, if we have so much more complete records of things now that will it slow down that evolution into the folkloric state? Does that make sense? Is that question reasonable?
It's a really good question. And the answer is that there are things that people value more than accuracy. Okay? We want to validate our own biases. We want to believe certain things regardless of what the facts tell us. That's the nature of humanity. We're always in there in our own best interests. And so, no, it won't be affected by any kind of validation or lack of validation. It's going to be out there on its own no matter what.
I'm thinking there's a lot we could and we're not going to talk about as a humbly publicly funded podcast. But in terms of things that may be turning into folklore, future folklore seems to be happening a lot right now as we record this in early July 2024. But it makes me think about Lake Erie in its current condition, right, as the most impounded or polluted of the Great Lakes. And there's a lot of issues with hypoxia and algal blooms and stuff like that. And you wonder if there are future sea monsters or lake monsters that may emerge out of this in the long run.
It's happening even as we speak. The new concern is no longer with industrial pollution. The new concern is with irradiation and nuclear pollution. some of it imagined and some of it worthwhile thinking about. And there's always this element in folklore of some kind of kernel of something that is real and important in there. And by unpacking it, you can find what that is. So that you not only have Bessie, but she's getting competition from other areas. On the Canadian side, for instance, from the Lake Erie Chomper, all right, and from speculations by people on being able to have fish fries in the dark where you can see what you're doing.
Tell me about the Lake Erie Chomper. I've not heard of the Lake Erie Chomper before.
The Lake Erie Chomper has been equated with a number of real fish, but it is apparently not anything that we really know. And there are all sorts of reports of it leaving bites. It bites people around Port Dover. It doesn't seem to eat them. It seems only interested in biting them. But the point is that it is the evil spawn of radiation and not of industrial pollution. So you can see the tradition evolving to accommodate more modern concerns than in the past. Same tradition, but it's modifying in order to accommodate more recent concerns.
So it's pretty similar to science fiction in that way, right? Where a lot of science fiction is sort of taking the far off and futuristic to comment on current day events and to create sort of a fictitious world that enables you to sort of leave the constraints of the modern world and use that to make a commentary. So do you see a strong relationship there between folklore and science fiction?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, there is no genre that doesn't appear in folklore. Ghost stories. I mean, you can name several genres. I couldn't even rattle them off, but they all find representation in folklore.
So, in terms of Lake Erie, can you talk more about some other themes? And do you have a favorite story? Can you share it with us?
Well, let me see. Themes. I would say one thing to keep in mind is that the book is not only stories. There are a number of ways that we express our traditions. We express them in material ways sometimes. The Lady of Lake Erie quilt, for instance. We express them in food ways. There are food ways around both sides of the lake that are unique to us. We express them in remedies for things. So there are beliefs. There are all sorts of stuff. It's just a compendium of everything that I could find. So tales are in there as well. So that's the answer to the first part of your question. And the second part was a favorite story, did you ask for?
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
That's really hard. That's like asking a parent to say which is their favorite child.
Oh, there are days where that's not hard at all. Like this.
I was going to say, even if you have one, it's not something you really want to admit. But I guess I would say there are a couple, and I'm not sure why I love them so much, and other people might not agree. But I love this. The Ghost of Eli Tarbell is one of them in part because it's a story that takes place during an era of body snatching on Lake Erie. And that's one. And the other one I would have to admit is a Superman story. I loved writing it more than anything else, and it ends on a very upbeat note, I think. And I ended the book with it. And so I have a certain kind of special affection for my Superman story.
That's fantastic.
So I'm just really curious, body snatching. So
yeah.
Please say more.
All right. So I guess in the years flanking the turn of the 1900s, I guess the late 1800s, no, I'm going too far ahead. I would say the late 1700s into the 1800s. It became necessary in medical science to use cadavers more and more, and they were not readily available. And so entrepreneurs who were called resurrectionists would steal bodies from cemeteries and provide them to medical schools. In fact, it became a ritual for medical students, at least in Ohio and on Lake Erie shore, to do this and to provide cadavers for study. Because even practiced physicians and surgeons had to keep up with the changing technology, and they needed to work with these bodies. So what happened was a lot of folklore was generated by that, and they would have to employ people to watch the cemetery to prevent body snatching at the time. And in Ohio, on Lake Erie shore, there was a body snatching, the body of Eli Tarbell. And I'm not going to give it away, sure, but it's one of my favorite stories.
That's fantastic. And you also talk a lot, thinking about like folklore, and you mentioned that it is more than stories. You also talk a bit in there about like folk medicine, right? And herbalism and things like that. And there's this one part where you have to give kind of a careful warning that about a plant that the USDA or the FDA says is dangerous. So what do you know about like folk medicine in Lake Erie? Is that something that was widely practiced, or was it just a couple of specific groups that were doing it?
Everybody practiced it because medicine was not at the level that it's at now. And even at the level that it's at now, I would say in the past 50 years, we've progressed 200 years in medicine. So when you go back to the 1900s or the 1800s, there was very little known. And much of what was known was not as good for you as you would think. We had cholera outbreaks in the 1800s that were devastating. And brave and well-meaning doctors stayed by to take care of the sick while other people fled. And just about everything they were doing for them was killing them rather than saving them. So, yeah, everybody resorted to what they thought would work. And that meant folk medicine, because professional medicine was not at the level that it's at now, that people could rely on the way they can now.
But some of it really did work, right? I mean, some of it didn't. Some of it maybe was poisonous, like you're saying. But some of the plants did work and led later to help with drug discovery and things like that.
Well, by trial and error, sometimes.
The worst way to do medicine, I suppose. But you have
it doesn't kill you. Yeah, it probably works. No, and you will find things that are like violets, I think. And not all violets. There's a certain strain of violets that have some kind of acid in there, which is contained in aspirin. So if you gave this to somebody as a remedy, they would feel better. It might not cure, but they would feel better to the extent that an aspirin might help you feel better with a headache or some other kind of malady.
So from the interesting to the ridiculous, I wanted to ask you, because Stuart has a plan to use round gobies in place of hot dog, as any regular listener would know. So can you tell us about evil fish, the galloping goby blue?
Yes, I'll be happy to. I made some notes here because I wanted to, in case you ask me about ground gobies, I wanted to read you one of the verses in the Galloping Goby Blues. But people are concerned with invasive species in the lake. For the past, I guess, let me see, I would say since the 1800s, species have been entering the lake that are not native to the lake. And they come either as discarded pets that are no longer wanted, or they come carried in by ocean-faring ships that enter the St. Lawrence seaways that open up into the lake, and the ballast that they dispose of sometimes carries these species. And of course, there are rules and regulations that are more and more being enforced in order to prevent this. But once you get a species in there that is able to survive, it's there. It's there forever, and you're not going to get rid of it. One of them is the round goby. And the reason that the round goby appears in the book at all is David Jude, who is an emeritus science research professional from Michigan University, who was a marvelous professor, apparently, and who entertained his students not only with his scholarship, but with this kind of overabundance of creativity, where he would write songs and sing them about some of the issues that were facing them and what they were learning in fisheries biology. So he chose the round goby because it is an invasive species. And what makes a species invasive is that it is dangerous to human health and to the economy and to the ecology of the lake. And the ground goby is guilty of all three. So he wrote about the ground goby, and I must say, folklore is not always polite. And it's sometimes even raunchy. And I would not recommend my book for children. I would say that, starting in high school maybe, through professionals, through academics, but not for kids. I'm not going to read anything here that isn't necessarily for kids, but I will give you one of his verses that I wrote down, or I thought I did. Yeah, I did. This gives you an example of his writing about the round goby. Round gobies now rule among the rocks. They can live out of water. They'll bite you in your socks. And if we don't stop them soon, they'll only be bad news. I've got those egg-sucking, fish-chewing, galloping goby blues. And the Galloping Goby Blues is a popular song. You can find it on a CD. You can probably get it on YouTube. And it's becoming part of the culture around here. Whether it will actually have the persistence necessary to enter into folklore and become a tradition, can't say at this point, but it certainly reflects the concerns of the people at this point.
Huh. That's interesting. The Galloping Goby Blues. That's funny. I'm going to have to look that up. What can we learn today, I guess, from the folklore of the past that what can we learn about Lake Erie, about the Great Lakes, about human-environment interactions? Like, is there a big lesson, or is it more complicated than just like one big lesson? But is there something we can learn from all of this that reflects, you think, on today's society as well?
It's a tough question to answer. I would say that only when we are well-informed about who we were in the past can we really see and evaluate who we are in the present. And only by doing that accurately can we make predictions that are most reliable for the future.
Why do you think people should read your book on folklore about Lake Erie rather than any other sort of folklore book or Lake Erie book?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that because it gives me a chance to tell you how wonderful my book is.
We were getting there too. Yeah, but okay.
I'm not too good at blowing my own horn, but I'll take it. I'll take the opportunity. First of all, I guess it would open by saying that this is the fully illustrated volume, and I had to fight for that, by the way. That wasn't easy, and most of it is in color. And what I did was, at least to the extent possible, it wasn't always possible, but for the most part, it is illustrated by artists who were working with the material at the time that these traditions were emergent or were important to the people. So you're looking at how they pictured it and how they represented it when it was real to them. And for instance, in the Eli Tarbell, The Ghost of Eli Tarbell. The illustration is from a book that printed part of a newspaper article that was illustrated because they didn't have photography at that time, where they show two notorious criminals committing body snatching. And it's a wonderful illustration and the kind of thing that went with the times. And there's a little history that comes with the illustration as well. So that's something very different. And also in line with that, it's not just an anthology of tales. They're so boring and I never really liked them. And, I'm not that fond of tales, so to speak. I want them to mean something. And so what I did was I unpacked them for my readers. And when I used any special lingo that academics use, I explained what the term means because they're not very mysterious. They tell us wonderful things. They're useful when you're talking with other academics because they save you a lot of talking. They're like a shorthand. Moti, well, we all know what that means. 516, that's Cinderella. But when you're talking to, or 510, excuse me, that's Cinderella. So for a general audience, I tried to talk in normal English. It was a change for me, but I think I was obviously successful because the press accepted it. And I've made it as accessible as I possibly can, and I think it'll be extremely enjoyable because it isn't just a list, like a laundry list of stories with some stories in there.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of these illustrations now. This one, The Resurrectionist by Hablet Knight Brown. That's a cool...
Yes.
It looks like, first of all, I didn't think about it, but when you're body snatching, I guess you got to have a little
Schnapps.
Yeah. They got it. So I'll paint the picture and we'll put a link. This is a public domain image, and so we'll put a link in the show notes. But so there's 4 or 5, I guess, body snatchers around a grave. It's dark out, but the grave has some sort of light emanating from it, maybe from a lamp, maybe from the beyond. And a couple of them are digging in there, and there's this one guy who's got a pickaxe and a fifth of something, and he's tilting back.
Right. And, it's a true image. It's, they took them under those circumstances, and that's what was there.
Right.
I just wanted to say it so that's really cool that you do kind of like an analysis of the stories themselves, because I kind of think that these sorts of myths and folklore resonate with people like on some subconscious level, and kind of you're helping make that connection, which that's awesome.
That's absolutely true. If you look at a traditional genre of literature, like say ghost stories, well, why do we love them? And we do. I mean, we've been telling them for centuries, and there's no end in sight whatsoever. And how very different they are. Think of how different they are. You have classics like Henry James' Turn of the Screw. You have, remember your childhood comic book, Casper the Friendly Ghost? You have campfire tales that are told around the campfire to scare people. I'm trying to think of other instances, but there are many different types of ghost stories, but they all hold the same thing in common. Because it's, The Sixth Sense I was thinking of.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right, The Sixth Sense. No matter how different they are, they all hold the same thing in common. And that is, at some level, they reassure us that something goes on after death, that the soul, at least, has a future. And that is comforting because it connects those who have lost loved ones with their loved ones, and because it gives us some reassurance in our own insecurity about what's coming in our own deaths. So, there's all sorts of unconscious stuff going on in there, and I try to make that apparent throughout the book. Yeah,
now you're getting into some Ernest Becker denial of death type stuff, aren't you? I don't know. Yeah. This book I'm reading now, thinking about it, is called Our Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill. And it is something like a feminist revisiting of Frankenstein. The gist of the book is that the protagonist is the great niece of Victor Frankenstein. And she is something of a scientist, but, she lives it's in the 19th century, and so it's a male-dominated society. And so she keeps having to push against this male-dominated society. And she and her husband, who's also a scientist, they find Victor Frankenstein's writings and decide for various reasons to bring something back to life. And but it's really takes a feminist angle on what it would have been like to try to be a female scientist in that era, and pushes back, on some of this stuff. And it reminds me of what you're saying, that Frankenstein, I think, probably reflected on its era's concerns about technology or society or progress, because the sub...
Darwin.
Yep.
Darwin, very concerned with Darwin's theories at that time.
Exactly.
Because, and, how dare you create only God can create life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so Our Hideous Progeny, which just came out, I think, this year, maybe late last year, speaks to sort of our modern appropriate concern with, telling more complex stories about people who aren't white dudes, essentially, right? And so it reminds me of exactly that process that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, and I could talk about this all day, maybe twice on Sunday. But that actually, Judith, is not why we invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes this week. The reason we invited you on Teach Me About the Great Lakes is to ask 2 questions, the first one of which is this. If you could have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which one would you choose?
Definitely a sandwich. I'm the savory type, not the sweet type.
Savory type. That's perfect. So I'm going to go to Cleveland. And I'm going to visit my wife's cousin, and I'm going to have a nice time. I'll go to a Guardians game. I'll visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'll look at the lake, look for a ghost, and then I'm going to be hungry for a sandwich. Where should I go in the greater Cleveland area to have a really good savory sandwich?
I would think anywhere that they're going to prepare a Polish boy sandwich for you, because that's our city sandwich in Cleveland.
Tell me about a Polish boy.
Well, it's usually on a delicious bun with a crisp outside and a soft inside. It usually has a kielbasa inside. With the kielbasa, there's also French fries. There can be either sauerkraut or coleslaw if you want, and sauce on top of this. And if that doesn't sound good to you, you got to taste it, because that's one of the most delicious things you'll ever.
No, that definitely sounds very good.
You got me at kielbasa.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, though. It's not a subtle sandwich, it doesn't sound like.
No, definitely not. And it definitely speaks of the Eastern European heritage along Lake Erie. In fact, I could go a little farther into our foodways by saying
let's do it. What the heck? Let's do it.
Oh, okay. Well, I would just say that's not the only foodway that's local to us. We have variants in this area of American foodways. For instance, there are foodways in folk religion, for example. You have probably heard of the sort of generic American Virgin Mary grilled cheese sandwich. Sure. And you may have heard of the Southwestern Jesus tortilla.
No. Well, yeah, actually, maybe.
Okay, well, you missed that one. Well, in 2004, on Easter Sunday, along Lake Erie shore in Toledo, a lady uncovered in the savory mist of her frying pan the Jesus pierogi. So, we've got it. We've got our variants too.
Look at that. Oh, I'm Googling the Jesus pierogi now. I don't know if this is the original one or not. Or maybe there's a whole series of Jesus pierogies now.
No, the Jesus pierogi comes from Toledo. You can find it in my book.
Yeah, look at that, the Jesus pierogi. Did that sell for $1,775 on eBay?
It did. It sold to an online casino, which also, by the way, bought, as far as I know, I don't know what else they've bought, but I know that they also bought the cheese sandwich and they bought a Madonna and baby Jesus pretzel. And I think what they have found is that they've got something that people want to look at and pilgrims want to come to that is far less expensive than the masterworks that are bought by other casinos.
Right. And so a casino buying the Jesus pierogi, that is definitely what folklorists of the future will be looking back at to reflect on our time.
No doubt.
Well, the Jesus pierogi has deeper meanings than you would think because, let me see, how can I phrase this? Give me a minute to think this one out.
I've eaten so many cheese pierogies. Now I'm desperate to.
Yeah. You've had the cheese pierogies, but none of the G's pierogies.
Yeah, the cheese pierogies. There are miracles and visions and images of sacred beings and sacred personalities that are authenticated by the church. And these are usually Virgin Mary visions that people have. And if you think about it, these visions usually take place in wide open spaces where many people can gather and see them. And the messages that are brought by these sacred personalities generally represent the best interests of the church. The difference between those images and the folk images that people have in folk religion is that they are not dependent upon any authority in religion to authenticate them. They know what they can see, and no one can take that away from them. This is a form of religion where I guess I would refer to Don Yoder, who's the folklore maven of defining folk religion. And what he said is that folk religion is the difference between what is preached from the pulpit and what is actually believed in the pew. And there is a difference. There is always a difference. That's where it's at. So what do you get out of a Jesus pierogi or a Virgin Mary grilled cheese sandwich? It's not necessarily in the best interests of the church. But what you get out of it is that these sacred personalities are interested in and care about ordinary people. And it doesn't have to filter through the authorities of the church or any other kind of authority.
That's beautiful.
It really is.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Okay, Judith, I'm going to ask you our other question. So what's a special place in the Great Lakes that you'd like to share with our audience? What makes it special? I
think, we have a tradition in our family that every Thanksgiving we go down to the beach and we take some leavings from our Thanksgiving dinner to feed to the seagulls. And that's just a lovely experience. It's probably not the kind of thing that you were looking for, but it's a wonderful family thing, and it involves the lake, and it's something that it wouldn't be Thanksgiving without Lake Erie.
Somehow that sounds appropriate for you and your world.
Exactly. Nothing better than a wonderful tradition from the folklore. Well, this is fantastic. Judith Neulander, she's the author of The Folklore of Lake Erie, which is out recently from IU Press, available where books are sold. You can find a link in the show notes. Just look down in your podcast player right now, click on it, and then just go order this book. I've read excerpts of it. I haven't read the whole thing yet. It's coming to me. I've ordered a copy, but I don't yet have it. But go check it out, because the bits I have read have just been fascinating, and a way to really expand your understanding of people's relationship with the lake, I think. But anyway, Judith, thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the folklore of the Great Lakes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
What a interesting conversation that was, and a fascinating book.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the range of topics that she covers. It sounds like a great read.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, maybe some of this will come up again in October when we release our fourth annual Lake House of Horror.
Yeah, and that's probably a good time to read the book too, right?
It will be.
With body snatching and monsters and
all the good stuff. Excellent. Well, Renie, writing anything good lately? Since we have you on, you're our science communicator. What science are you communicating these days?
Well, I just posted a research story about a Chicago lab that their goal is to discover new antibiotics, and we funded them to bring in some middle school kids and have them become junior scientists and look for antibiotics, bringing in samples from their environment, and running them the process of screening them. The kids did great, and one of them actually found a compound that may have some cancer fighting possibility. So it's
very cool.
It was a lot of fun to learn about this story, and I think it was really a really nice opportunity for the kids. That's for sure.
Yeah, tying back into our conversation, it's interesting how we seem to be re-entering this era of looking to nature for solutions after a long time of better living through chemistry and plastics and learn to code and all that. And I don't think we're no longer in that era, but it's like looking again for nature-based solutions. We seem to be heading that way as a society. And
this couldn't be any more nature-based in terms of the girl who found the potential medicine. It was in goose poop.
Goose poop. There it is.
Nature at its most basic.
It really is.
Teaching About the Great Lakes is brought to you by the fine people at Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. We encourage you to check out the cool stuff we do at iicgrant.org and at ILINC on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media.
Our senior producer is Carolyn Foley, and Teach Me About the Great Lakes is produced by Megan Lake Lover Gunn and Renie Miles. Ethan Chitty, he's our associate producer and our fixer. Our super fun podcast artwork is by Joel Davenport, and the show is edited by the magnificent Sandy Svoboda.
If you have a question or comment about the show, please email it to teachmeaboutthegreatLakes@gmail.com or leave a message on our hotline at 765-496-IIC-GRANT, which is 4474. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Teach Great Lakes, but that place might be too creepy even for Lake Erie. Thanks for listening. Keep rating those lakes.